welcome back to another episode of the Homestead Connection. Today we are going to be talking about all things succession planting. Kylie and I are going to cover everything you need to know about maximizing your garden space.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about succession planting because it's something that is kind of new to me. I started succession planting for the first time last year, and I'm taking it pretty seriously this year. So I've done a lot of reading about it. It's something that I'm really enjoying kind of mapping my garden out with when it comes to succession planting.
Yeah, same here. I only started doing it last year and it was just very little bit. And so this year we're doing a lot more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about succession planting because it's something that's a little bit new to me. I started succession planting last year, and I planted a couple of crops in succession last year, but this year when I was mapping my garden out, I really took what I wanted to plant and planting in succession more seriously so that I kind of knew how to map out my full-size garden, and I decided to move some of my succession planting crops to like containers and grow bags. So anyways, succession planting this year looks totally different for me than last year. So it's just something I'm excited to talk about. And I actually planted my second succession of carrots and radishes earlier today. So the timing of this whole deal is perfect.
That's awesome. It's so nice that you can succession plant in smaller areas as far as grow bags or raised beds, whatever you have available to you. Succession planting just really helps you maximize your harvest at the end of the year.
Yeah. And that's one of the things we were really hoping this episode will help give people information and direction and inspiration on how to succession plant, so that whether you're going to try to succession plant this year or have the knowledge to be able to succession plant next year, we just really want to help equip you guys, our listeners, to the best of our ability, whether it's in your full-size garden or if it's in pots and containers. So what is succession planting? It's a term that you see sometimes. It's one that we've talked about over on the Homestead Connection Instagram. I've got a blog post coming out about it tomorrow. And what is it? So basically succession planting is when you're going to take certain crops that have a very short harvest window, like carrots or radishes or lettuce, something that's basically 65, 75 days or less, and you're going to plant that multiple times throughout your growing season. It's a really good way to maximize your yield. It's great for smaller spaces, and it's also a way to avoid an overabundance of produce so that you don't have stuff that's going to go to waste. For me personally, I like radishes, but I don't like to have too many of them on hand because what am I going to do with 100 radishes? There's only so many ways you can preserve radishes that, in my opinion, are tasty. So I'd rather grow a small amount of them multiple times instead of have one large harvest of radishes.
For sure. And for me, my favorite thing to succession plant would be green beans, because we love canned green beans in this house. And for us, we go through them so quickly, but I only have so many hours in the day. And to be canning green beans all hours because I planted so many at one time is just not feasible. And so for me to spread that out over a couple successions during the summer and to just plant green beans, once now, and then I can can those up. And then in a couple weeks again, I have another crop ready to roll. It saves time for me, and I'm not stressing out about needing to get all of this canning done at one time to preserve for the rest of the year.
Yeah. So you said green beans, and I actually just did that. So I planted, this is my first year succession planting green beans, so I wasn't sure the quantity that I wanted to start with. So I did jade beans, jade beans are a bush bean. I don't care for pole bean varieties. I have other trellising and vining plants. I prefer determinate plants. So jade beans, I started 12 of them from seed, early spring. And so they've been in the ground now for a couple of weeks, and I'm actually starting to get an abundance of green beans now. And I should be able to can green beans for the first time this weekend. And I'm really excited about it because I didn't can green beans last year. Last year, I actually didn't do any pressure canning at all. And one of my big main goals and focuses this year was to can all of the green beans that our family uses for an entire year. So I put those 12 plants in the ground, and I just put 8 more in because these ones are kind of in full swing, full force. And these other 8 that I put into the ground, they're still going to need a couple of weeks to get there. But by the time they get there, my thought and my hope then is that the beans that have been in the ground for a while, they're going to start kind of to peter out. And if you've grown beans before, they'll produce all season, but their production really slows down.
Yes.
And it's not that that's a bad thing. It's just when it comes to wanting to like actually preserve and put away an abundance of food to like enjoy later, I really want stuff to grow as optimally as possible.
For sure. And green beans is a great starter for pressure canning. Like, green beans are so easy. I love pressure canning green beans. And they just taste so darn good that your family's just going to love them for the next year. And so all your hard work for putting in the separate successions is going to be so worth it.
I tried planting carrots in the ground 2 years ago. It didn't work out well. My soil's too much clay in my soil. So I did carrots in grow bags last year. It worked great. And so now that I know that carrots in grow bags work well for us, this year it's just been carrots, like so many carrots, because I also want to be able to preserve those for the whole year as well.
That's awesome.
So before you start succession planting, or when you're considering succession planting in your garden, there's like 3 things that you're going to want to look at first and ask yourself before you move forward. And the first thing is what zone do you live in? For me, I live in zone 5A. Molly?
I live in 4A. I'm actually right on the border of 4A and 4B, but err on the side of caution with 4A.
So actually, I'm right on the border of 5A and 5B, where like just right directly on the border. So I also err on the side of caution by going 5A, because the higher up you get in your growing zones, basically the shorter your growing season is and the earlier your frost dates are. And so for me, by erring on the side of caution, if I'm going to assume my first and last frost dates are a little bit earlier, then I can be pleasantly surprised if I have an extra week or 2 before I get that frost. So you want to ask yourself, what zone do you live in? You want to know when your first and last frost dates are. And the third question you want to ask yourself is, how long to maturity are the vegetables that you want to plant? So how long is it going to take before you plant your seed and harvest the fruit or the vegetable that you're aiming to get by planting that seed? Because once you know those things, once you know your growing zone, once you know those frost dates, and once you're familiar with how long it's going to take to get that harvest, then you're going to be able to know how many successions you could plant if you wanted to, and what types of vegetables are going to be reasonable for you to actually plant.
Yeah, I think it's also important to think about when you're thinking about succession planting is, what is your family going to consume the most of? Mm-hmm. So when you are planting in succession, you're planting because you need more of that, or you're desiring more of it, right? And so why succession plant tons and tons of carrots if your family's only going to eat a certain amount? And so succession planting, really, to maximize it, is going to be to what your family's going to use the most of. And so if you think about it, we have 52 weeks in the year. Say my family is going to eat 1 canned jar of green beans per year, okay? I need at least 52 quarts or pints, whatever your family size is, jars for the year to be self-sufficient on green beans, right? So then you're going to need to figure out, how many beans does it take to fill in my jar to can it for the size that I need for my family, and then kind of figure out what your yield is per plant. And then you can kind of determine also how much successions you need to plant to have a sustainable amount for your family.
That's so good. Yes, you're completely right. That's one of the things I've looked at for myself, and I love that we're using green beans because it's just so on par with what I'm trying to do for my family. I would really like to do at least 3 successions of green beans, but I think I can squeak in 4 successions of green beans. So with me being in zone 5A, 5B, my my last frost date is like May 15th. And then I'll expect frost somewhere around the middle of October, like October 15th-ish. So realistically, I could plant green beans until right around the beginning of September and still harvest from them. And that puts me around four successions of green beans if I stay on top of things. If I do my job and stay on top of things. But that should give me a year's worth of green beans. So
sure.
Once I do my first round of pressure canning green beans, hopefully this weekend, I'll really have a better idea for round 3 and round 4. If I want to do 8 more plants, or if I want to do 12 more plants, or if I need to increase it to like 14 or 16 more plants, just to have the quantity that I want in order to feed my family, because we truly eat at least, we probably eat a can of green beans a week, maybe 2 cans every other week. It just kind of depends on how I'm preparing the green beans, but it's something we reach for a lot because my whole family likes green beans. And that's kind of rare to have a vegetable that the entire family will eat.
For sure. And knowing that all plants, like your yield from them, is all going to be varying, right? Like some plants going to produce more than the other. And so planting extra is better. And that's where it's super helpful to have second, third, fourth, fifth successions of certain things. So that way you are getting enough to last your family for the rest of the year.
For sure. The other thing with succession planting, so we're talking about planting in succession in order to maximize the amount of yield you have to like enjoy right now or to preserve later. Like the other things that are really nice to succession plant are the vegetables that bolt. So spinach that bolts, broccoli that bolts. You might get one nice head of broccoli unless you get too much heat and that bolts. Same with your spinach. How you might get, it's nice for a couple of weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before it bolts. Those are other really nice crops to succession plant, so you can enjoy them for a longer amount of time. And it doesn't matter if they bolt then. For me, I'm not growing spinach this year just because I find personally that it's too much work for what it's worth. But I am doing that with romaine lettuce. I love romaine lettuce, and I'm always harvesting from the outside, every couple of days. But at some point for me, lettuce just needs to be pulled and started fresh. So I have a second round of romaine lettuce getting ready to go on the ground here shortly.
Yeah, same. We have some lettuce. Some of our lettuce didn't fare very well. It's been very dry here in Minnesota this spring, and it's just not thriving. And so we need to plant some more. I have the seeds out, so I'm going to go probably put some in the garden later this week, because right now I think I only have like 4 or 5 healthy, good-looking plants, and that's where the beauty of this comes in, where I can put it in again and know that I'm going to get a good crop coming.
Yeah, nope, I think that's my first round of radishes looked so terrible, and because it's so dry here. I planted my radishes. We went out of town. It's been so dry. I just pulled them and started fresh because it's just not worth it to put in the effort when I know I can restart them, and that the radishes should come up in just 30 to 40 days basically.
For sure. That makes complete sense.
One of the things you said was about analyzing or looking at what your family actually uses and needs before you go and just decide to plant it over and over again. And when I was looking at the most common crops to succession plant, because I know what mine are. My main ones are, lettuce and green beans and some other stuff. But one of the common crops to succession plant is okra, because the turnaround time for okra is 30 days, which is awesome if you love okra. But if I planted a ton of okra, it would just go to waste.
Being from Minnesota, I don't even know what I would do with an okra. I don't even know if I've ever had okra, to be honest.
I've had it, but I wouldn't grow it. I like it if we're going somewhere, someone offers it to me, that's fine. But I wouldn't grow it.
That is a
same
quick
with
grow time. 30 days.
30 days.
Wow.
Eggplants is another one. It's not on the top list, but it's one that I was surprised not to see. And we'll get into kind of some of the most common vegetables to plant in succession here in a minute. But last year I planted 6 eggplants. We were up to our eyeballs in eggplant.
That's going to be me this year. I planted eggplant for the first time. Don't know what I'm going to do with it, but we're winging it.
My chickens wouldn't even eat it.
Right.
At the end of the year last year, so the first couple of eggplants, I harvested them. I made some vegetable lasagna with eggplant noodles. Or, you know, you can do that with zucchini
Yep.
noodles. I did it with eggplant noodles. Turned out great. It's a little bit, you know, laborious, but it still tasted really good. I did that. I did eggplant parmesan a couple of times where you like bread it and fry it. And then by like the end of June, I was done with it. I was like out the window, done with it. I kept giving it to my chickens. My chickens wouldn't eat it, so I kept throwing it in the woods for the deer.
There you go. Someone needs to eat it.
The flowers on them are beautiful though. Like eggplant is very beautiful to grow, and they start as just like these tiny little, I don't know, they're just like these tiny little purple nubbins, and they just grow and they're so beautiful. But anyways,
What other vegetables are good for succession planting?
so the vegetables that I succession plant most commonly, just for me personally, are carrots, radishes, leafy greens, and green beans. But like I said, this year is the first year I'm taking green beans very seriously. But those are the ones that like my family will eat, the ones that are practical for me to continue to grow kind of over and over. But some of the other ones are, so like leafy greens. So we're talking like different types of lettuce, spinach. Those take 50 to 60 days to grow. From the time you plant that seed to the time it's ready to harvest is 50 to 60 days, which makes awesome for growing all year, or like all growing season. Peas are another one, which I do actually have. I just reminded myself I just planted a second succession of peas, of sugar snap peas. Those only take 60 days
And they're so good.
to. They're so good and they're easy. Those you can blanch and freeze.
Yes.
You can eat them fresh. You can shell them if you want to. And so those are another one I planted a second round of. Carrots are an obvious one. We know those take so little time, 60 to 75 days for most varieties. Although I just planted a variety earlier today that says it's 55 days to maturity. Radishes, okra, those are both 30 days to maturity. Turnips was another one. Beets are another one. These like
Wow.
root vegetables. You can see like leafy greens and root vegetables are like the two big ones. And then brassicas. So things like kale, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, 60 to 85 days.
See, and I had no idea that cabbage was actually something you could succession plant. We love sauerkraut, and so maybe next year I'm gonna have to succession plant. I mean, I could still do it yet this year. Probably a second crop of my cabbage, so that way I could have more sauerkraut for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
I didn't know I could succession plant those. That's cool.
Well, and you think about, so when you're succession planting, especially these things that are like a 1-to-1 seed to harvest. So 1 seed per carrot, 1 seed per radish, 1 seed per cabbage. With broccoli, a lot of times you'll get that 1 head of broccoli and then a couple little shoots here and there that you can cut off if you wanted to. But even cabbage is one of those like 1-to-1 ratios. You don't have all these baby cabbages coming off. But if you want to eat it fresh, or make it into sauerkraut and, store it for later, absolutely you could. And sauerkraut's something that doesn't keep for forever. So to make it, ferment it, and enjoy it, and then give yourself a break, and then, while the second round is growing, you can absolutely do that. But things like cabbage, so kale, cauliflower, broccoli, cabbage, actually kale is very short to fruition, just like leafy greens, 50-ish days. But the cauliflower, broccoli, and cabbage, they can take up to 85 days. So for me, in zone 5AB area, my growing season is like 154 days. So that means I need to start my first round of seeds like in March, so they can go in the ground as quickly as possible, and then immediately start that second round if I want to make sure that I can harvest it before my first frost date. And not to get too long-winded, but some of these things like brassicas and peas and carrots and radishes, those are also good cold weather crops. So even if you tip into that first frost or into those colder temps, those cooler nights, those are the types of crops that you're succession planting all spring, all summer, but then they can still tip over into early fall and you're not going to suffer any major consequences.
For sure. And that's nice. And even not that you want anything to, not survive the cold weather, but since you succession planted them throughout the spring, summer, when it gets into fall, if it does happen, you're not like just devastated because you lost that whole crop because you've had it throughout the whole summer.
Absolutely, for sure. There are some other crops that people will succession plant, like corn was one, certain varieties of cucumbers and zucchini, but it's a little less common. And some of those ones get to be very specific to like longer growing seasons. So warmer climates zones farther down in the states or in the country.
Yeah, and another thing that I think is really common to succession plant and that I have been doing more of is flowers. So if you're talking about cut flowers, and you're wanting to have bouquets or go to the market or just have bouquets for your house, you need to succession plant your flowers because if you plant them all at one time, you're going to have like a few week window where you're going to have beautiful flowers and none the rest of the summer. And so succession planting flowers is the way to go to ensure that you have beautiful blooms all summer long. A lot of flower farmers will plant things every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks. Certain flowers you need to succession plant more of than others because they're kind of like a one-hit wonder. So like think of a sunflower or a snapdragon. Those you will cut off and they will not come back. But like your zinnias or your cosmos, you cut those and they come right back. They come back again. So those are called come again flowers. So cut and come again. And yeah, so flowers are super important. If you are wanting to have, them in vases, you will want to succession plant those as well.
Last year was the first year that I planted any flowers from seeds. So I've always done, where you go to the greenhouse, you get it from the hardware store, and I'll plant stuff and enjoy it that way. I'll do hanging baskets or different perennials like daisies or echinacea or whatever, and then enjoy them as they flower. But last year was the first year I planted anything from seed in terms of flower, and I planted cosmos, I planted some zinnias, I don't know, a variety of things. But I did exactly what you said. I planted them, I don't know, first week of June, and I didn't get to enjoy them until August, pretty much almost. It wasn't until August that I was finally able to cut the zinnias, cut the cosmos, put them in vases around my house, which I absolutely loved. But this year, I took starting flowers from seed a little more seriously, not quite, but a little bit more seriously. And I started a handful of perennials from seeds in my greenhouse, like, I don't know, beginning of March or something like that, so that I can hopefully enjoy them earlier this summer. And I intentionally planted perennials because I'm still learning so much about flowers. Like, I didn't know that when you cut a zinnia, it will come back even more blooms than when it first grew. And so, I mean, the girls and I planted a ton of zinnias the other day, and I'm really excited about that. But I intentionally planted perennials this year and started them from seed so that I'm hopefully a step ahead next year when I start flowers around my property.
No, flowers have a lot. It's kind of a learning curve and it's not easy to know. And if you see flowers and you see beautiful flowers and you want beautiful flowers, it takes a lot to figure out what you need to do to get them to look like that all summer long. And so succession planting is the key.
Is there a couple flowers that you would recommend just for like the first time, like me, a first time beginner succession flower planter?
Zinnias are so easy. Zinnias are forgiving, and I think that they are super easy just because they do cut and come again. So, even if your succession planting isn't on par, you're going to have flowers. Snapdragons are beautiful. I have a huge love obsession with snapdragons, and those ones you need to start early. Otherwise, because they have such a long time to maturity, and so you'll want to plant those early, and you'll probably want to plant those every week, every 2 weeks. And then probably the most popular one for people is sunflowers. Everybody loves a beautiful sunflower, and when you cut that stalk, you're not getting any more, right? And so planting sunflowers in succession, every week or every 2 weeks will ensure that you're having those throughout the summer.
Okay. Well, that's good. Well, I've got the zinnias in. We planted a couple of sunflowers, but I want to go back out next week and plant some more sunflowers. So where we planted the sunflowers, there's room to plant 3 rows of them. So the girls and I planted 1 row, like the farthest back. And so hopefully next week then we can like plant another row. So we'll see how
that'll be perfect. The reason that I actually started succession planting was I worked really briefly at a flower farm, and I was planting seeds often. And, every day after we would go and harvest flowers, I'd be in the seed room planting more sunflowers or whatever we had going on. And so that's how I actually was really introduced to succession planting. And then it expanded into my personal garden, especially with green beans, like I touched before. And so that's how I got started succession planting. How did you find out about succession planting? Because years prior, I had never really heard about it. And I feel like last year it really took off online and people were talking about, I'm going to have a fall garden and here's why. So how did you find out?
Yeah, no, I remember the whole fall garden thing last year. I felt like the fall garden stuff last year really blew up, and I had never heard of a fall garden. But even before that, last year, by the time everybody was talking about fall gardening, it was really too late for me to plant an intentional fall garden. But I had started succession planting last year, and I just kept a couple of my successions going into those like late summer months into early fall, or late summer weeks, I guess, into early fall. And the way I first got started with succession planting was really with my lettuce and my spinach, because my spinach bolted so fast 2 years prior that last year I decided just to plant 2 rounds of it. I also succession planted peas last year. I forgot about that. And maybe it was just the brand of peas that I used. I felt like my yield of my Sugar Snap peas was very low last year, and they were done producing before my family was ready to be done eating them. So I planted a second round of peas last year as well, and that worked out great. The time to fruit production on those was really quick. So that's really how I got around to it. Before it was talked about on Instagram, before I really knew about what a fall garden was, I really just wanted to make sure that the things my family liked and the things that my family was eating were available for longer in our house.
For sure. Sugar Snap peas are a hot commodity here too. Nobody wants to be done with those early. So that's nice.
As long as it can be dipped in ranch, my kids will eat it. So,
all right.
Sugar Snap peas, cucumbers, radishes, whatever it is, as long as it can go in ranch, my kids will eat it.
Perfect. Well, guys, thank you so much for hanging out with us today and learning all about succession planting.
I've written a blog post recapping everything we talked about today plus more over on the website, www.thehomesteadconnection.com.
Until next time, we'll see you soon.